quiet street in Warrington. Early morning. Just frost on windscreens and a van ticking heat. Across the road, a plain unit. Branded windows, lights off. Inside, there was no one moved. Not yet. But behind the walls were names, ledgers, and weight. More than anyone on that street could guess. Police had been watching for months, every delivery, each face and van, waiting for the right moment. Not to catch a deal, but to cut the power at the top. Because the men behind it weren't corner boys. They were something else entirely. This is the story of Leon and Anthony Cullen, and how two brothers built a criminal empire behind locked doors and business fronts. Longford sat on the northern edge of Warrington. Rows of red brick homes, broken curbs, and the quiet tension of a town caught between two cities. Liverpool to the west, Manchester to the east. It wasn't gangland, but you didn't have to go far to find it. Leon and Anthony Cullen were born here in 1987. Identical twins, but sharply different temperaments. Anthony was the smoother one, the type teachers said had potential. He stayed calm, smiling, and stayed out of trouble, at least where people could see. Leon was different, intense and quick to anger. As a teenager, he bounced between being the life of the party and the one to fear. People didn't know whether to laugh with him or stay out of his way. But what they shared was ambition and loyalty. You never saw one without the other. From the schoolyard to Friday night bus rides, they moved like a unit. Their parents weren't criminals, no gang ties. But the streets didn't care. During the late 90s, the northwest drug trade was exploding. Manchester and Liverpool were bleeding turf wars into surrounding towns, and Warrington felt the pressure. Class A was everywhere, and the people pushing it, they didn't look poor. Flash watches, BMWs and designer jackets, the dealers looked like stars. The Cullen twins were watching, they started small. But even in those early moves, there was calculation. They wanted more, not just the money, but the structure, the reputation, the control. By 18, they were done playing small. They were building contacts, quiet ones, mostly through Liverpool. And every mistake they saw another dealer make, they learned from it. They weren't going to be reckless, they were going to be professional. And they were only just getting started. By their early 20s, the Cullen twins had stepped up. They weren't just shifting bags for someone else. They were running things, carefully, and through people they trusted. Their first front was called Spot On Signs. On paper, it was a print and signage company, logos, banners, and branded gear. But inside, it was the cover for a growing Class A operation, a place to move money, hide stock, and keep things looking clean. They kept records, spreadsheets of who owed what, how much had moved, what still had to be paid. Everything was recorded and had its place. It was a business, and they ran it like one. Police were watching simultaneously. In late 2010, Cheshire Police launched Operation Cortex, a full-scale covert investigation, surveillance teams, informants, and undercover officers all working to track what the Cullen brothers had built. They found stash houses, burner phones, and safe locations. Couriers making regular runs from Liverpool into Warrington. Leon stayed in the background. He didn't handle the drugs himself, but he gave the orders and made the decisions. In early 2011, police carried out raids across Warrington. They searched several properties and found cocaine, cash, phones, and detailed records. The records were key. They showed who worked where, who owed what, and who answered to who. Leon was arrested and later convicted of conspiracy to supply Class A. Prosecutors said he ran the whole thing as a central figure in the region's supply line. He was sentenced to 9 years and 8 months. Anthony wasn't picked up at first. He stepped in during Leon's absence, kept things moving. But it didn't last. Within a year, a second police operation brought him down too. He was found at a processing site in a caravan fitted with equipment, scales, and blocks of high-purity product. Anthony was sentenced to 5.5 years. It looked like the Cullen chapter was closed, but prison wasn't the end. It was the reset. They didn't waste time. By 2015, both Cullen brothers were out. No mess, no noise, just a return to business. But this time, it was different. They'd learned from the first fall. No direct involvement, no visible wealth. This time, it would be more organized and harder to trace. The new front was called Future Press Limited. On paper, it looked like a promotional goods company. T-shirts, branded merchandise, marketing kits. But in reality, it was a cover for laundering money. And behind it all, a network that stretched beyond Warrington. From Merseyside and Greater Manchester to North Wales and the North East. The structure was tighter than before. Leon kept out of sight, acting more like a director than a dealer. Anthony ran day-to-day operations, personnel, logistics, security. Trusted lieutenants managed transport, storage, and movement. Enforcers dealt with problems, quickly and without warning. This time, they paid wages, monthly with bonuses. There were rules of expectations and penalties. This time, they moved the product with precision. High purity Class A, better than most of what was already on the street. They didn't cut or dilute it. That purity gave them an edge which buyers noticed, and so did their rivals. At its height, the network was making up to £290,000 a month. This wasn't just cash stuffed in boxes, it was cleaned, managed, and put back into the business. And behind it all was a plan to stay hidden. No online presence, no names on anything. They used encrypted phones, changed vehicles often, and moved between safe houses. Even the storage locations were swapped regularly, always trying to keep distance between themselves and the product. It wasn't just the Cullen twins. Beneath them was a core group, each with a clear role, each handpicked for trust. Some were family, some were friends. All of them played a part. At the center with the brothers was Chris Houghton. He wasn't just close. He was trusted with the gang's weapons like rifles, handguns, shotgun, hand grenades, and silencers. He handled the movement, storage, and supply of firearms, making sure the network had muscle when needed it. Sean Ryan operated on the enforcement side. He was connected to debt collection and intimidation, the kind of work that kept people quiet, kept payments coming, and reminded others to stay in line. Matthew Spencer, Nigel Girk, and Chris Potter all handled transport and logistics. They moved large sums of cash across counties and managed deliveries between stash houses, couriers, and the main operation. Their roles were quiet and vital to run complete operations. Others managed key support areas, running safe flats, storing product, or moving gear on command. Steve Cowell, Robert Bibby, and Michael Mason worked across these functions. Josh Mercer, Steve Wood, and Christopher LaRosa focused on movement and delivery. Dylan McGann, Liam King, and Gary White provided hands-on help, moving between roles as needed. Jason Eastons, Sammy Hadri, and Scott Quinn assisted with short-notice jobs, often as backup or second-layer security. Andrew McElligott and Thomas Hill handled low-profile logistics, keeping eyes on drop locations and managing handovers. Most of them didn't know the full picture. They worked in fragments. One task, one name, one van. It kept the operation secure. The plan behind was, if something slipped, only a small piece was exposed. That's how the Cullen cartel stayed running, through discipline, division, and silence. It started quietly. By 2016, police knew something serious was operating in Warrington. Movements were too precise. Money was moving fast. But there were no mistakes, no obvious trails. They needed more than suspicion. They needed structure. That's when Operation Samurai began. Cheshire Police launched it as a deep surveillance mission, long-term, resource-heavy, and aimed directly at the Cullen brothers. Over 18 months, officers tracked the network piece by piece. Couriers, vehicles, and their delivery patterns. Meetings that lasted minutes. Drop-offs where nothing changed hands, but everything moved. Phones were monitored. Addresses recorded and watched again and again. They watched men enter flats empty-handed and leave with bags. They watched vans leaving and returning with different plates. It was methodical, and the brothers never touched the gear. Every connection was layered. someone to move, others to hold, or to collect. No one knew the full chain except the Cullens. The deeper police dug, the clearer the scale became. This wasn't just a Warrington operation, it fed into something bigger. Intelligence began to link the Cullens to Liverpool's Tobin brothers, Alan and John, the masterminds behind a national drug supply network. The Tobins weren't street dealers, they were wholesalers, and Cullens were their regular clients. In the next few days, I will make a detailed video on them as well, so make sure you hit the notification bell to get the updates once published. A few days later, police watched a quiet meeting in the countryside involving Anthony Cullen, John Tobin, Robbie Broughton, and Robert Bibby. There were no drugs or money exchanged, just a calm conversation over tea with a van parked nearby. Then came the M6. In August 2018, the biggest land seizure in UK history happened, where 186 kilograms of 90% pure cocaine hidden in a van's false floor with the value of over £20 million. I have published this video earlier, so make sure you check that as well. By early 2019, the surveillance was done. Warrants were signed, phones were tapped, safe houses were mapped. The brothers had built their empire in silence. Now it was about to be dismantled in one coordinated strike. The strikes came fast. On the morning of the 10th of January 2018, Cheshire Police moved in. Operation Samurai had run for more than a year. Now it was time to end it. Raids were carried out across Warrington and beyond. Entry teams hit properties at the same time, safe houses, stash flats and transport points, without warnings or knock and wait. Anthony Cullen was arrested without incident. He didn't run. Police found him at one of the key properties identified during Operation Samurai. His arrest was one of the first, a crucial step that signaled the collapse of the leadership. But while Anthony was in custody, his twin brother was already gone. We will talk about him later. Chris Houghton, the gang's armourer, was arrested first. Inside his flat, officers found multiple firearms, pistols, automatic rifles, and silencers hidden behind a false wall. It confirmed everything police already suspected. This wasn't just a drug crew. It was armed, structured, and dangerous. Sean Ryan was found days later. He'd been seen watching one of the Cullen safe locations without drawing attention. Police moved in and took him and the drugs. Matthew Spencer had already been stopped on the A1, caught with £104,950 in cash hidden under floor panels in his van. Nigel Gurker was arrested separately, caught carrying £43,700 in cash zipped into a sports bag. No explanation was given. As the raids expanded, more names were picked up. Chris Potter, Josh Mercer, Gary White, and Michael Mason were arrested in homes and vehicles across the northwest. Robert Bibby, considered one of the Cullen gang's inner circle, was also detained, quickly moved into protective custody as tensions escalated. Search teams recovered encrypted handsets, burner phones, substantial quantities of high-purity cocaine, along with drug ledgers and movement schedules. In multiple addresses, they found concealed compartments, false floors, hidden wall panels, and magnetized trapdoors. The police didn't just want the product, they wanted the people, the roles, the system. And with each arrest, the map became clearer. The operation was no longer just a network. It was evidence, stacked, labeled, and building towards court. While Anthony Cullen was arrested during the January 2018 raids, Leon Cullen was nowhere to be found. Police believed he'd slipped out just days before the operation began. He didn't leave a trace. No phone, no bank trail, no digital presence. Surveillance turned up nothing. Warrants were issued. International alerts followed. But for months, there was silence. Leon had always kept himself a step removed, not just from the product, but from exposure. No social media, no flashy profile. Most of the gang didn't have direct access to him. He moved through intermediaries. That made tracking him harder. The theory was simple. He had fled abroad. But where? Police worked with national and international agencies, Europol, Interpol, Border Control. Bit by bit, fragments emerged, a pattern of aliases, forged documents, and rented properties. Not enough to act, but enough to keep the net open. It took nearly 2 years. Then, in early 2020, a lead came in. Leon had been spotted in Dubai, living under a false identity, renting a flat in a high-rise block. Surveillance confirmed it, and officers coordinated with Emirati authorities. The arrest was swift. He didn't resist. He was flown back to the UK under armed escort. The man who had once sat at the top of one of Britain's most structured drug cartels was finally behind bars. His return changed everything. With both Cullen brothers in custody, the final phase began, building the case that would take them and their network to court. The takedown didn't end the violence. In the weeks after the Cullen raids, Warrington didn't get quieter. It got worse. With the whole network arrested, the structure collapsed, but not the tension. The Cullen network had dominated the local trade. Without them, others saw opportunity. Rivals moved quickly, safe houses were hit, couriers vanished, families were watched. Mibalit, the message was clear. Territory was up for grabs. Police recorded a rise in targeted violence. A grenade was thrown outside a family home. A man was shot in a drive-by. Another shooting took place outside a barber's shop. Robert Bibby, one of the Cullen gang's inner circle, was placed under police protection after credible threats emerged. Detectives feared he was being hunted by a rival group trying to dismantle the remnants of the network. For Warrington, it marked a dangerous turning point. What had once been quiet and controlled turned volatile. Power had been removed, but not replaced. Police increased patrols. Armed response teams were deployed across high-risk zones. Surveillance units were reactivated, this time not just to monitor organised crime, but to prevent a turf war. May 14, 2021, Liverpool Crown Court. The prosecution presented a formidable case. It was a portrait of an organised criminal corporation, operating across the northwest and beyond. The defense response varied. Leon Cullen, appearing by video link, claimed he wasn't directly involved in day-to-day operations and that his Rolex and designer items were personal possessions, not evidence of large-scale crime. Others argued they were peripheral players, unaware of the wider conspiracy. These defenses carried little weight with the court. The judge described the enterprise as a sophisticated, well-planned and persistent criminal operation. Wholesale supply of high-purity cocaine, a lethal cache of firearms, and intimidation that rattled the local community. He began with Anthony Cullen, 33, labeling him a co-founder and logistics leader. Anthony received 27 years in prison. Next came Chris Houghton, the gang's appointed armorer, was sentenced to 20 years. Leon Cullen, 33, was identified as the strategic head who pulled strings from a distance and facilitated the network. He received a sentence of 22 years and 6 months. But the courtroom wasn't the final stage of the message. Before moving on to the rest of the sentencing, it's worth seeing what Cheshire Police did next, and how they made their warning impossible to ignore. They displayed the aged mugshots across Warrington to make the consequences of organised crime unmissable. By showing how Leon and Anthony Cullen will look at the end of their prison terms, they aim to cut through the myths of fast money and respect. Robert Bibby, a lieutenant involved in enforcement and logistics, received 13 years. Sean Ryan, linked to intimidation and debt collection, was handed 14 years. Matthew Spencer, responsible for moving large sums of money, got 12 years. Nigel Girk was given 11 years. Chris Potter, Josh Mercer, Gary White, and Michael Mason, who managed transport stash operations, were sentenced individually to terms ranging from 10 to 12 years. The combined sentencing total exceeded 185 years across all defendants. The sentences reflected both the scale of the conspiracy and each member's significance, undeniably dismantling what had operated like a drug and gun cartel. What do you think of the Cullen case? Did the sentencing fit the scale of the operation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real UK crime stories like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another case to uncover.